Our final presentation of the day deals with how virtual store technology can help solve today's retail labor shortage. Our speaker is Melissa Juergens, Chief Operating Officer of InContext Solutions. Melissa, the podium is yours.
Thank you, John, and good afternoon to everyone. Thank you for joining me here today. I'd like to also introduce my co-pilot for this presentation, Mike Caputo. Mike is responsible for all of the 3D development at InContext, and he's navigating the visual aspects of our presentation today. So we're here to talk a little bit about labor shortages and some ideas that we think can help both brands and retailers navigate this a bit more nimbly. The shortages have created a bit of a new normal in our operating processes, decision-making, and in-store strategies. And my hope today is to give you some new ideas that will help empower category decisions with solutions that ultimately have less reliance on labor. So we'll take you over to first walk you through some of our thinking. I hope you enjoyed the initial tour of our Retail Innovation Center, and we'll take you through that in more detail as we get into our talk. So the first question we want to answer to set the stage is, where are all the workers? Everyone in our industry is well aware that the labor shortage is happening and the impact that it's having on retailers. But where are the workers? In some cases, there's continued concern about the virus. It's keeping people out of the stores. And as a place you'd expect to see larger crowds, workers are uneasy about the virus are unlikely to return to a job in store anytime too soon. And there's also mounting evidence that people simply want something different from their lives since the pandemic. Whether they experienced a trauma or are simply having the time to reevaluate their priorities, people aren't in a hurry to return to the ways of the past. And then finally, the gig economy. It's becoming more and more common for people to make a living wage leveraging the gig economy. And since it doesn't require specific education or experience in most cases, it's an easy transition for individuals who previously would have been seeking employment in retail. Which brings us to the next challenge. As a result of all this, of these trends, it's very expensive to hire talent right now in retail. We're seeing things like sign-on bonuses of $3,000, college tuition reimbursement, record wages of $18 to $20 per hour, lots of perks and benefits from 401k to insurance to paternal leave. And the bottom line of this to retailers is increasing impact on their operating costs. So now discussion on pressures on retail wouldn't be complete without considering the supply chain issues. So whether you've experienced this as a professional or as a consumer, the lack of product availability in all areas of retail, including grocery, is a significant factor. And it's just one that's requiring us to work and think in new ways. I also want to reflect for a minute on the changing dynamics of online versus in-store. So of course, with the pandemic, we saw a dramatic shift to online shopping. And while the growth rate won't be as dramatic as it was in 2020, we're still seeing over 20% of grocery sales shifting to online in the next 3 years. So that's profound, yes. But on the flip side, 80% of sales are still going to happen in store, so we don't want to take our eye off the ball there. Thus, the focus of my talk for today is on in-store and ideas we have to help keep both brands and retailers, or helping brands and retailers to thrive in this new normal that was initiated by a global pandemic and reinforced by labor shortages and supply chain disruptions. Our first business issue or opportunity area is the simplified shelf. One of the solutions we've seen used in grocery to combat out of stocks on shelf is the idea of a simplified shelf, a shelf that focuses on core items. So why are retailers doing this? Well, simply put, it's easier to keep the shelves stocked when complexity is reduced. So, okay, that makes sense. But what does good look like when the shelf is simplified? Focus on core items brings up questions around leading the aisle, brand blocks, private label placement, and overall flow, and how that changes with a simplified shelf. So what are shoppers going to think? How will they respond? And said differently, how do we define what good looks like in a simplified shelf? This is uncharted territory in many cases because we don't have a lot of the history to rely on. So I wish I could say that there are core principles that apply across categories when it comes to the simplified shelf, but as with everything in grocery retail, it's complicated. And the strategies that make for a successful core shelf in one category may be very different in the next. It can vary from channel to channel, but I can say that a general principle, if you will, of the simplified shelf is that they can have a very positive impact to shoppers beyond the benefits of keeping products in stock. A simplified shelf is just that. It's simple and therefore easier to shop. So the easier it is to navigate and find products that you want and need, the more time shoppers have to explore and add incremental items to their basket. So while the simplified shelf is seemingly a necessity in light of shortages, it may have a silver lining. So back to the question, how do you get to the right simplified shelf? What we've recommended over the past months are virtual store tests that compare and contrast the sales impact of different versions of the simplified shelf. So by testing these simplified shelves virtually, companies are able to test without the reliance on in-store labor in order to hone in on a simplified shelf that is best for their unique situation. So the next topic we want to cover is product substitutions. Substituting for your favorite brand or item is becoming a norm expectation for shoppers with lesser product supply available. But when shoppers' go-to brand is not available, what are they willing to switch to, and when will they walk from the category? If a brand or category is being impacted by shortages, how do you plan for substitutions and know that they'll be a satisfactory substitution? It's important to understand when shoppers leave the category. So on this slide here, what we're showing is, or what we're saying is to do that, you need to look at their purchase decisions or lack thereof after their first choice brand or second choice brand is not available. So that sounds obvious because you can use that data to point which products have the highest walk rate. You can see in this example, brand A has the highest walk rate. So a fast and efficient way to get this information is to send shoppers through a virtual shopping exercise that is repeated multiple times. And then in each subsequent shopping attempt, previously purchased products are removed from the consideration set and force shoppers to rethink those purchases. The results demonstrated here show which brands present the greatest risk of walking from the category when unavailable. The second part of this solution is defining the most substitutable items. So in addition to having priority items available on the shelf, those that cause the highest walk rate were not available, as I said before, it's also important to identify which items are most substitutable for others. So when that inevitable out of stock strikes, the category has the best possible assortment backup plan, so to speak. Giving shoppers an alternative is a necessity when scarcity is a reality. So data such as this explains shoppers' behavior related to those secondary and tertiary choices and can be particularly helpful in defining that backup plan. In particular, we've seen this type of data used in telling the story for category defenders, so who present typically a strong alternative when leading brands aren't available. So in this example, the Acme dog food and the small dog brand are those strong secondary contenders. All right, so moving into our third opportunity area, and really the reason that we wanted to have our presentation in the retail or the digital retail innovation center. The reason we're focused on this is because being in store is obviously one of the best ways to make decisions about the store. Mock centers also can serve as a great alternative or complement to that fully immersive in-store planning and approval process. But again, with labor in short supply, these kinds of approaches in the physical world may be a cost that is just no longer justified or even possible. Plus, our new normal finds people working from home, unable to travel, nervous about getting in with groups, or just not being able to get into a specific physical space on a regular basis. So we've all become experts at using Teams or Zoom, but it's really hard to create an in-person meeting or to recreate an in-person meeting that's meant to happen in store. And that's why we're having our meeting today in our Digital Retail Innovation Center. So this is a digital space that is designed specifically to facilitate collaboration that can be done or would typically be done in a retail store or a mock center. So think about using the Digital Retail Center to visualize things like category resets, seasonal signage, or end caps, or displays. So to start, you can see we can obviously stream this presentation, so it can be done from a distance. Or for this particular presentation, streaming our screen within the Lead platform, but equally a link can be shared with your audience so that their screen is right inside this Digital Innovation Center, seeing all of these items up close and personal. So let's start by recreating that planogram review and walkthrough process, and we're going to fly over to the planogram we've pulled into this Innovation Center. So here's how the 3D planogram process or review process could potentially work. We've got a 3D planogram here in front of us that you can review in more detail. And then in addition to pulling in the entire 3D planogram, you can tie in relevant data and insights to that planogram. So it's really a multi-dimensional way to tell the story of a new arrangement or flow. We have heat maps and color blocking, two options. There's a lot of different ways that we can tell that category story.
Melissa, we had a question just came in here that is pertinent.
Sure.
How long does it take to create a digital space? How many people does it take to create a 3D store?
That is a great question. So it depends on what you want or need. We have a lot of templates of digital 3D stores within our library. We also have this Digital Innovation Center as something that is just existing. And then it's up to the individual to customize that. The customization comes with importing things like PSA files that you're already going to have access to, which populate a planogram and can let you customize space. But really any content that you have in 3D can just be pulled in here and done on the fly is the intent. Okay,
another follow-up question from another attendee. This is very interesting, but why would a shopper use this technology versus just ordering products online?
That's a great question, and one that we are exploring. I think that this technology, the intent of the use here is much more for business planning purposes. However, we are exploring this as a tool to facilitate shopping for shoppers, and it's something that we're actively researching. Our initial findings and feedback is that shoppers find that shopping in a scenario, not necessarily like the one you see on the screen right now, which is the Digital Innovation Center, but a recreation of a store in 3D, is very compelling. But there's a lot of questions to answer in terms of how we make that really an at-scale shopper experience.
Okay, thank you.
Sure. Okay, so you've got an idea of how the planogram review could potentially work in a Digital Innovation Center. So we'll just move over to an example display. So now imagine you could have this showroom full of all of your seasonal displays or end caps. You'd be able to walk up the Digital Retail Innovation Center, discuss each, make decisions about it, and how you're going to implement it in store. I think the idea here is that you've really got a full 360 perspective, but don't have to be there in person. Now our next stop is to take a look at what we call pin boards. The Digital Innovation Center is a tool that gives you a little bit of pomp and circumstance. In this case, I've just pulled in some GIFs highlighting products that were on my planogram. But you can imagine using this for new product introductions or other items that you really want to call attention to. So we call these pin boards, and they can ultimately be used for marketing, educational purposes, or simply to tell a brand or marketing story. So you can imagine pulling in images, video, data, PowerPoint, really any media that you would like to use that supports your category story that you're trying to tell. All right, last but not least, we're going to go to our dollhouse. The dollhouse is a digital replica of the physical store in its entirety. So we're starting here with this bird's eye view, giving you a 20,000-foot perspective on the store and its layout. And then you have the ability to jump into any part of the store and view it from a shopper perspective. So the real advantage here is being able to tie in the strategic discussion that was potentially happening previously when we were reviewing planograms, reviewing displays, reviewing those products up on the pin board, and then seeing how they actually play out in store with the actual execution. So it really ties the story together in a complete way. So with that, that concludes the presentation today. I'd love to answer any other questions that we have.
Sure, Melissa, there are some questions. And by the way, on the screen right now for follow-up with Melissa, there is her contact information on the screen. But we have a few more questions that came in I'd like to shoot your way. Number one, how are shoppers responding to the simplified shelf?
That's a great question. So the simplified shelf is one that I wouldn't say it's not necessarily a new idea, right? It's something that has been used in different situations in the past. It just has particularly beneficial, there's particularly beneficial reasons to use it right now. One of the big benefits of the simplified shelf is that it's just easier to shop. And so whenever we've explored this as an idea before, what we often find is that shoppers respond very positively to it because they just aren't spending as much time making decisions. They're able to find products more easily, and therefore they're adding more incrementality to their basket. Now, that's not a truth across all categories and all channels, but I've seen it play out probably most with more complex categories that are traditionally a little confusing.
Another question, how many people will this new technology replace for labor shortage?
That's a great question. I think that I don't have an answer in terms of the number of people, but I think where in general it has the biggest impact is related to resets in the store. The idea here is that you're able to use the virtual store technology to do a lot of the test and learn that would typically happen in a physical space, and so that you reserve those resources for when you're ready to go, you're locked and loaded with a fully baked idea. And so, and not to say that wasn't happening before, but there's a lot that's learned once you see things in the real world that ultimately ends up resulting in tweaks and adjustments. And the idea is using virtual to get some of those kinks out of the system before going in store, so you have to draw less on your labor resources as a result.
Okay, another question. Does InContext work with other 3D companies, or do you have your own team?
That's a great question. So we do work with other 3D companies, and we also have our own team. One of the things that we do is build the 3D versions of retail stores that live on our platform. But it's important to be able, there's a lot of 3D content that's out there, and as we've heard about things like the metaverse quite a bit in the news over the past couple of weeks and months, and 3D content is going to become ever readily more available. And so an important part of what we're doing is making it easy to ingest 3D content that you already have, so it's not necessarily unique to our platform. We just want we just want a platform that's really easy for retail planning, wherever those various aspects of 3D content come from is not as important to us.
Okay. Next, can virtual research impact how we understand online grocery substitutions?
Yes, that's a great question. So I think that, when we were talking about grocery substitutions here, the focus is definitely on in-store, but I think the insight that could be taken from that and applied to online is you're getting some really direct behavior changes based on certain products not being available, and that insight could then feed things like suggested alternatives that are made available to shoppers when that primary brand or product is not available.
Okay. Interesting question here. VR headsets, do we really need them?
Yeah. So that's a common perception when I start sharing this vision for a virtual planning platform, is that it is needed, that you need a headset to use it or participate with it. And that is not necessarily the case. I think headsets are great, and I think they're very, very immersive and can be a really good way to go about this. But they definitely aren't required. In fact, 90% of the work that I do day to day is on mouse and keyboard, and that includes collaborative planning in the virtual retail store with people that are in different locations than I'm at.
Okay. One more. Is a core items shelf better from a labor perspective? For example, how important is product placement knowing there is a bigger block for each brand?
So I think what that question is getting at is how does the core item shelf affect those brands that are still there and where they're placed on the shelf, because inevitably there's going to be some changes in terms of where products are. I think that the good news is that most of the items that are there as core items are likely going to have more facings. And so as placement shifts with additional facings, they're going to become easier to find. So that movement on shelf is less of a concern, but something still to keep an eye on.
Okay, final question. Retailers still really like their physical set room. This seems like a big change.
Yes, that's true. I think that everyone is more comfortable in the physical because that's what we know, and that's how we grew up. That's what we're familiar with. And part of the reason for enjoying those spaces is that they're very immersive, and they help you to make decisions about what you actually want to do in store. What we're striving to do is to give an enhancement, I think, really to that, a tool that it might replace in some cases when you just can't be in a physical space with someone. It could be a replacement, but hopefully it also enhances and gives you more opportunities to plan and make decisions about the store when you're able to do it in the context of the store.
Excellent. Well said. It is a big change. This is progress. This is new technology. Thank you, Melissa. That was really, really very interesting. And thank you, Mike, for handling the background controls of this presentation.
Thanks again for having us, John. Really appreciate it.